Lisa Boothe is in Washington. She's a Republican strategist and president of High Noon Strategies. Lisa, thanks for being with me.
Hi, Elaine. Thanks for having me.
Donald Trump cruised to a first-place finish in New Hampshire, with a wide margin of victory. But South Carolina's electorate looks very different from the New Hampshire electorate. What hurdles does Donald Trump face there?
Well, you're right. He did have a resounding victory in New Hampshire, and I think he answered some questions about his candidacy. I mean, the big knock against Donald Trump has been there's a lot of fanfare, but is he a legitimate candidate? And I think his resounding victory in New Hampshire helped answer those questions for him. However, just like you said, South Carolina is a different primary electorate than in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, you have your more moderate independent voter, but in South Carolina, according to exit polling in 2012, 65% of South Carolinians consider themselves Christians, evangelical Christians. You also have a heavy military bent, specifically in the central and southeastern part of the state. So those are going to be key factors in South Carolina.
Well, a big story of Ted Cruz's victory in Iowa was his ground organization and his focus on retail politics. Donald Trump had to play catch up to some extent on those fronts, and in New Hampshire, we saw his strategy transition somewhat to be a little bit more like Cruz's. But will Cruz still have that advantage in South Carolina?
I think he will. I mean, Ted Cruz has been known to have a superior ground game. We saw it in Iowa. And two, you look at in Iowa, it was the evangelical Christians that helped propel Ted Cruz to victory. As I mentioned, according to exit polling, you've got about 65% of them in the Republican primary electorate in South Carolina. So I think that's going to help him heading into South Carolina. And what we're looking at right now with the Real Clear Politics average is Donald Trump has been polling at an average around 36%. Ted Cruz at 20%, Marco Rubio at 12%, and Jeb Bush at 10%. And I really think that's what this fight is going to be about. It's going to be between those contenders as we head in. We're already seeing the attacks happen. Donald Trump is up with an ad attacking Ted Cruz for talking outside on the both sides of his mouth on issues like amnesty. Ted Cruz also has an ad calling Donald Trump a fake Republican. And Jeb Bush is going to be running radio ads on Wednesday featuring his brother, President George W. Bush.
Let's talk about John Kasich. He led among the establishment candidates with a second-place finish overall. He's polling at 2%, though, in South Carolina, as we just saw. Will he have any chance in the coming primaries to build momentum with another top finish?
I think it's going to be tough for him in South Carolina because, as I said, if you look at the Real Clear Politics average, we've got Donald Trump in the lead, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and Jeb Bush. So I think it's difficult for John Kasich. He may get a little bit momentum out of New Hampshire, but I think it's going to be difficult for him to assert himself in the state, as you mentioned earlier, without really a ground game established in this state. And then further, just an electorate that looks a lot different than you have in New Hampshire. New Hampshire has that moderate independent voter, whereas in South Carolina, there's going to be a heavy military focus, both active and retired. And then as well as the evangelical Christian focus. And I think that's going to be tough for him to try to assert himself there.
All right. Lisa Boothe, thanks so much for that analysis.
Thank you for having me.